I'll hand over to Janine to open with a bit of an intro. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, councillors. So the purpose of this workshop is really to bring you up to date with the work that has been occurring over the last several months towards the review of the funding system for flood management and drainage. So with us today, very lucky to have our support team who've been doing all the heavy thinking for us. So we've got Peter Cochrane from Tonkin and Taylor online, and I'll throw to Peter shortly. We've got Kent Dustin and David Hall as well, but we'll let the guys do an introduction. They certainly all bring different but very complementary skills to the table for us. So yeah, just an opportunity to bring councillors into this conversation. As noted in the report, there will be a document that we will leave with you at the end of the meeting for your feedback before we have another workshop more detailed with you in May. Sorry? No, it's not a questionnaire, it's a draft report in terms of the key findings and the direction of travel for this piece of work. The team can walk you through that today, I think. But with that brief introduction, I'll hand over to Peter.
Kia ora tatou. Thanks, Janine. My name's Peter Cochrane. Along with Kent and David in the room, we've been heading up this piece of work around funding for flood management and drainage. I'm from Tonkin and Taylor, had over 30 years with experience in water quality and flood management in general, and myself and Kent have been working at a national level around flood management as well. Look, most of the afternoon will be spent with Kent presenting, because A, he's in the room, and B, he's the brains behind most of this. Look, there may be a range of questions that you've got as you work as he works his way through the presentation. It would be good maybe if we're able to hold those off till towards the end of his presentation, and we can cover them off more comprehensively. But look, I think we're pretty flexible, so if you've got any really burning questions, look, please let us know, and we'll attempt to address them as we go through. So look, now I'll hand you on to Kent, who will introduce himself, and then he'll hand on to David Hall, who will introduce himself, and then we'll hand it back to Kent, and we'll kick into it. Kia ora, team.
Thanks, Peter. Your microphone, right-hand button should go red. You're in. Don't turn it off, please.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Kent Dustin toku ingoa. I am Principal Consultant and Managing Director at Habitus New Zealand. As Peter said, we've been working with Tonkin and Taylor for some years now on flood management, flood protection, both at the regional level, but also at the national level through Te Uru Kahika. So it's our pleasure to come and talk to you about this particular piece of work. There is some PowerPoint. We promise not to do death by PowerPoint. And there is a document that we're going to leave with you for reading. You're going to love the document. It's a fantastic read. The plot is amazing. The characters are excellent. And Netflix have a mini-series in production as we speak. So you're going to really enjoy that.
Non-fiction.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So the purpose of the workshop, what we want to do is orientate you exactly as Janine has said. To actually, before I get into that, I'll himself, so you know who we all are.
Thanks again. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Hall. I'm Executive Director of the Toha Network. We're building tools to enable communities to attract funding and financing for themselves, especially in regards to resilience. We're working and doing pilots in the East Coast region currently and launching some pilots elsewhere. I've also got a long-standing background in funding and financing for these sorts of challenges, especially in the climate adaptation space, having authored a report for the Ministry for the Environment on this topic, and also supported the Finance and Expenditure Committee of the New Zealand Government recently for their climate adaptation inquiry as a specialist advisor for the committee. So bringing some of that experience into this process here with Waikato Regional Council. Nice to meet you all, and I'll talk soon.
Okay, so the three of us, Peter Cochrane, Tonkin and Taylor, the engineering guys who understand flooding, flood modelling, all of that stuff. Hevelis, that's me. We do the cost benefit and valuation side. And then David does the very important question of where the money can come from. So that's basically how this all fits together under Janine's guidance. So purpose of this session, this is a relatively short session. What we're going to do is give you an update on progress when it comes to the funding approach for flood management and drainage. This feeds into the review of how funding works. The important thing is that we are not proposing any changes to the rating system for either general rates or targeted rates in this LTP. So this is about the process, it's not about the money as yet. That comes a little bit later. As you're probably aware, the last time we looked at the rating process was Project Watershed, which was about 2002. So, a lot of water has flown under the bridge, pun intended. Since then, a lot of things have changed. There are a whole bunch of new challenges that we have in front of us. So while Project Watershed was very, very good and certainly leading the thinking in the sector at the time it was created, the world has moved on a fair bit. So this is the review of that work. And what we're trying to primarily do is look at where the costs and benefits of the schemes lie. So there's been the approach of Project Watershed is essentially the beneficiary pays. If you are the landowner, you are the one contributing to the scheme. We all know intuitively that the benefits of flood protection, of flood management, extend well beyond the boundaries of those specific landowners. So that's the purpose of this review. How are we going about it? So the first step is to assess really where those benefits occur. And the purpose of doing that is to see where the costs could fairly land. So in other words, if stakeholder groups are receiving benefits from flood management, then they should be contributing to some of the costs. So this is a basic kind of equity discussion, if you like. And when we think about what happens in flood events, and of course we are all much more thinking about flood events, particularly over the last 6 months, given the numbers of states of emergency that have been declared across the country. We know that the impacts spread fairly widely. So yes, there are impacts on the immediate landowners, but also the individuals, the families, the businesses, the economy, the insurance companies, the government, all of these stakeholders are affected either directly or indirectly as a result of flooding. So what we're trying to do is, what we're doing at this point is building the platform that shows how those effects ripple through the economy and how they ripple through our communities using the GIS platform as the starting point. So the idea is that we start with the GIS model of the flood, and then we look at where those costs spread as a result of the flooding event. And the intent of that work is to then be able to say, therefore, all of these groups have a share in paying for the flood protection that they are receiving. At the moment, that benefit is restricted solely to the landowner. Those are the people that we're rating. By looking at the effects more widely, we can say what is the equitable share of funding that all these different groups should be contributing to flood management. All that sort of making a bit of sense thus far?
What's been saying for the last 3.5 years around this table, long before that, there's some drainage growth in 3 years. So finally, we're going to get the community paying for what they benefit from.
Well, look, we were looking to hold questions till a bit further down in the program. Is there something that, with the opening statement,
I understood that 15% of the costs are actually paid by the general ratepayer rather than the targeted.
Okay. Rivers, not drainage.
Gary?
Yeah, I feel that I do have something pertinent there. I was very instrumental in the forming of Project Watershed back in the beginning there, where we challenged the Electric Corp on the Mighty River Power and all of the consents for the power dams. to be clear, Project Watershed was brought in as a replacement for the Tongariro Offset Works Agreement in 1967, which accounted for the extra Wanganui water coming through Lake Mayafongo down through the scheme and adding at any given point 10 to 15% of the water in the Waikato River, taking up the flood storage. So when you were starting to talk, and that's why I was given all the looks, there was that I was highly concerned that it wasn't just, okay, we've forgotten all about the Tongariro Offset Works Agreement, we've forgotten all about Project Watershed, we're going to start looking now at how we divvy up who pays for the flood schemes. So, so long as it's still giving that protection for that extra water that was put in the Waikato, I have no problem with it. But, and when I say I mean all of the farmers in the lower Waikato would have no problem with it, so long as those protections are still there, because.
So let's let the presentation carry on.
Yeah.
Thanks for the history.
So that's just the history of the background there.
Yeah, that's very useful context. Thank
Yeah.
you. We are factoring effectively the exacerbators, which is part of that function. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So what we're tending to do, or what we're building at the moment, is essentially the ability to value the impacts of flooding. That valuation deals in three separate areas. So the first is the value of assets affected. One that's pretty easy for everybody to grasp, because we see, flood event occurs, it's going to impact buildings, it's going to impact structures, it's going to destroy vehicles, it's going to damage land, those kind of things that we understand as assets.
Oh, you'll need a microphone.
Just clarification, you're talking about flooding and it's an interconnected. So when you say flooding, are you talking about managed network well in this context, or are you separating them? Because there's a review of all of it, but can you just be a bit more specific rather than generic? If you mean overall, please clarify.
Yeah. Good point, Councillor. So essentially the way that we're looking at this is in terms of the flood event. Okay? So if an event occurs, and there can be a number of contributors, there can be a wide range of impacts that occur as a result of that, we're looking at the full extent of it. So yes, that is within scope. So first thing, value of assets affected. Fairly straightforward, pretty well understood, and of course the insurance companies do a very good job of doing some of this. Then we're also looking at essentially the economic impacts. So this is the impact on businesses and farms in particular, including stock damage, business disruption, turnover loss, essentially those economic effects. And those economic effects are both direct, so in other words, they affected businesses in that flood event, but they're also indirect, in the sense that those economic effects then ripple out through the regional and into the national economy. Turnovers alter, patterns of economic activity change as a result. So the effects are not ring-fenced just to the owners of the property. The third area is the impact on people. Essentially, this is the communities that are in the path of the flood, either directly or indirectly affected by the flood event itself. So that's their financial impacts, how it's affected them financially, and that would to some degree depend on their socioeconomic capability and deprivation, include the health impacts, the wider social effects, the kids that had to move out of a different school, all of those kind of cascading effects that we see when there is a major flood. So in looking at this, what we're really doing is we're saying if a major flood was to occur and the flood management was not in place, so in other words, this is what Peter Cochrane refers to as a banks down scenario. Right? If the stock banks weren't there, flood management was not there, here's the scale of the impacts spread across. So where flood management is effective, every time there's the opportunity for a flood, but it does not occur, that is the benefit realized. The flood event did not occur. Makes a bit of sense. So what we're doing is modeling two things. First is banks up. Here's what it looks like today. Second is banks down. Here's the disaster that has been avoided as a result of these flood management schemes. And we're assessing both the direct and the indirect costs as they spread through the economy.
Let's wait, Ben.
Okay.
Now, this is work obviously being done in the Waikato, and as was the case with Project Watershed, the council is really at the leading edge of what's happening nationally. But this feeds directly into work being done by Te Uru Kahika, which we're working on with Tonkin and Taylor and Peter's team in particular. So Te Uru Kahika is currently got bids up to Crown for Crown funded assistance for flood protection schemes. So at the moment, council has bids of about 18.25 million into the next tranche of funding, which is up for budget 2026. And the funding split there is about 60% to the Crown, percent to council. So this is the first time, well, over the last couple of years, this is the first time that we've had Crown money to assist with the capital projects associated with flood management. These are CapEx contributions. They are grants, so they very much affect council bottom line. They do not, however, go towards the operational expenses of flood management. Okay, so this is for capital works only. But even so, those are fairly significant contributions, and this work here essentially helps Te Uru Kahika build the rationale that says the government is receiving quite significant benefit from flood management and therefore should be quite a significant contributor to what's associated with. So this is quite important work, not only for council, but also nationally, because it helps set that rationale, ongoing Crown investment, co-investment. Okay, so this document here, you're going to love it. Right? What we're doing, this is a relatively complex area, and I think as council has already shown, there's a lot of knowledge and expertise and history in this room. So rather than bringing you a completed and finished document, what we're bringing to you is a draft. Parts of it are still incomplete because we are looking for your input and your guidance as this goes along. Make sure that it is taking shape in the way that makes sense for this council and this community. It's relatively complex material. Obviously, flood management and drainage is not a simple subject at all, as you all well know. So what we're going to do is we'll pause for a few questions, but then we'll work through the document structure and give you the document to take away. Once you've had a chance to read it more thoroughly, then by all means email questions through to the project team. We can address those as we go. On the 11th of May, we're reconvening for a workshop once we receive that input, once we refine the document further to work through it in more. It's intended to be a 3-hour session where all of the detailed things that your questions that will undoubtedly arise as you work through this, get a chance to deal with in detail. So what we were trying to do here is give you the orientation to it, make sure that all of that makes sense to you folk, give you a chance to then take away, digest it, have a read of it. As questions come up, ask them, but then we can reconvene for the workshop to work through and go, what are the implications and what are the steps? So the scope of this phase, however, as I said at the outset, is not to set rates. This is the proof of concept. So what we are doing is explaining the methodology of how we get from flood events to dollars, validates where we're going to get the data from, and it enables us to do the valuations and show how the figures get calculated. Now, the important thing is that this is the proof of concept. We haven't developed numbers in the GIS system yet. So assuming that you are happy with this approach, that will be the next stage, is then to put it into the models so that you can run a flood model. So, okay, I see not only where the water went, but in fact where all the dollars go as well, in terms of the impact. And in parallel to that, then have the work being done by David on what are the available funding sources to, given this is where the value lies, what are the funding sources we can use that are outside the traditional fees, charges, target rates, general rates, the funding structures that we have. And David's done a very comprehensive review of that, which you will find in this document. So So we've got a couple of intentions with this work. So first is that we want to put in place equitable funding for the schemes. So in other words, if a scheme has these effects, we want everybody who's receiving that benefit to contribute to the scheme, at least that analysis. And the other thing that it does is it allows informed discussions with communities. So it provides a platform for council to discuss with communities what the future of these schemes are like, how they might be funded over a term, and actually lie. Now, what that's going to highlight, as I think most people in this room know, is that some stakeholders, and not looking at anybody in particular, the Crown, are recipients of benefit from flood management, but we can't rate them. We have no way of effectively getting money for the protection that we're providing through ratepayers. So this provides a platform to then go and have the conversation with, a good example would be NZTA, receive significant benefit from flood management, but they contribute next to nothing to funding those schemes. But it enables those conversations to be had. And importantly, this takes us to the next stage, but does not impose rating changes in this year's LT. I've talked a bit.
I'll come to Ben. You had the question first.
Oh, yeah, mine was just confusion about the term flood protection schemes. So as I understand it from what Noel was saying, the drainage schemes are 100% funded by the farmer.
The
Landowner. But where you get to Pyro and we've got a flood protection wall there, that's funded at least 15% by the general ratepayer or possibly even more. So when you use the word flood event, is that what you're talking about rather than flood protection schemes? Because flood protection would cover the river running through Wairoa as well as somebody, a farmer that's got a flood bank. So does there need to be clarity on that?
Drainage and the flow of water interacts, right? It's not a case of which department we happen to put it in humans. Right? And so the interactions of those things we are modelling. And what we're looking at is what was the, to some degree, what factors exacerbate that? What makes it worse? What makes it better? What increases it? Really what we're looking at is X basis. So in other words, if the flood event occurs, what would the effect be? And to what degree would, is benefit being achieved by these different as a result of the flood management? Those tend to get expressed as this is a scheme to achieve a specific objective in this geographical space. What we have to do
It's all good. Is that a Ben?
Well, no, just to clarify, so at the moment we have 15% funded by general rates and the rest is, yeah.
So
you're signifying that there are people who could be paying who aren't paying. Apart from NZTA, are you indicating that the general ratepayer should be paying more?
That's the point at which we're doing the modelling, right?
Okay.
And figuring out where. But there are people who are receiving benefit today who are paying today.
Right.
There are people who are receiving benefit today who are probably paying the wrong amount, either too much or too little. And there are people receiving benefit who are not paying. So what we're going to do is tease all of that apart. So where are the costs and benefits really like? Who should be contributing and to what extent?
Hopefully this is done in time for, oh no, when former local government changes the whole system. Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Robbie.
So go back, I think there's a bit of Ben doesn't understand, but it's more like there's a makeup of 80% targeted project watershed and others in that rate, and then it's normally 20% general rated on top of the asset, which is stock banks or whatever. But where did you get the information that we've only just started receiving money from government funding from loans and that? Because we've been receiving those for 10 or so years. I think that's not right. We actually have been getting on our second trench of deluge funding, and before that had shovel ready. So we've been getting money for quite a while. And I think the government understands the big dollar value is every dollar that goes into flood protection. There's about a $80 return to the government for every dollar spent. So, but that's not, that's just clarifying some of that. My big thing in this, and I'm totally with where you're going, I'm not against any of it, but my thing is it has to be a whole catchment. Everybody is an exacerbator. Urbanites have actually, their towns are growing and they've got a lot more influence on our flood protection and drainage schemes than they ever have. And yet the ones at the bottom have got infrastructure that's getting to get bigger because these guys are pouring more water down on them, and they believe, oh, it's their problem at the bottom. And that's the bit that's got to be resolved. That is not sustainable to keep building bigger and bigger infrastructure because everyone's an exacerbator. So that's the bit that needs to be resolved. And it has to be a whole catchment. You take the Valley and the Waihouse scheme, most probably only a third of the land is actually paying rates towards the schemes. And they're all the guys that have most probably from Highway 26 down are paying the contribution to it because that's where the assets are. Yet everyone keeps tipping water in the top and they're not paying bugger all towards it. So 100% support everything you're doing.
So just to pick up on a couple of those points, Councillor, with Tonkin and Taylor, we developed the Before the Deluge report, and that was 2021, I think, at the behest of Minister Jones.
Yep.
And Minister Jones, obviously we're now at sort of the third tranche of funding that's come. And Minister Jones has been a real champion, actually, of understanding the implications of flood protection. I mean, as you guys know, flood protection assets are 90% of the assets of the entire council. At least $1.2 billion worth of assets out there. So this is the major part of what we do. Minister Jones has really been the first minister who has bought into that. In terms of where the equitable share lies, the fact that through those three tranches we've been able to get a 60% split to the Crown and a 40% split to regional council is some acknowledgement from Wellington that in fact, you know, Crown is a really big beneficiary of making sure that communities and business. The ratio that's there that you're talking to is actually between 5 to 1 and 6 to 1 in terms of return on investment. That's in metrics data. They're always knows they're pretty conservative kind of a consultancy, so that's really at the end of the scale. In terms of return on investment from flood protection, that blows out of the water practically any other infrastructure project in the country in terms of return on investment. So just getting to the point now where Wellington have been beginning to recognise that this work, although happening at the regional level, is so vital. Continue that conversation and say this is exactly how much.
Oh,
Thank you. A couple of comments and then a question. The recipient, as I said before, I've been banging on for some time, several years, about those who benefit, and that's the person in the street who goes in and buys their butter, etc., etc. They benefit from those flood protection schemes. So obviously a wider distribution of funding is great. You made a comment about approaching NZTA, and you've just commented about Minister Jones. Be careful what you ask for, because Mr. Jones has provided millions and millions around the country and several million into this region. And in the 50s and 60s, the government was a major contributor to the big schemes as we know it on the Waikato. Not sure about the Waikato, but so the reality is they paid big capital up front and that tails off over the years. And so to go and ask NZTA while this funding is going on, I think is double dipping. But I'll wait to see what the respective organisation says. So coming back to the question, classification. At the moment, we've got classifications that have been in place for umpteen dozen years. And as you, I think, referred to in some way, they're probably no longer relevant in many areas with land subsidence and the land use, etc. So is classification a key part of your work, or is it coming at a later stage? Because without doing the reclassification, we could end up with some absurd outcomes.
Yeah. Project Watershed was very good at doing the analysis to come up with a classification scheme. It's got very complex over the decades. Right? And that's kind of a natural outgrowth of taking that approach. By the time we've identified who are the stakeholder groups and what benefit they're receiving and therefore what contribution they should make, a revision of the classification scheme naturally falls out of that, right? I think everybody's on the same page in terms of making that reclassification as simple as we can believably get it, but that work is further down the track from here. But naturally what would happen as a result of this is that reclassification or changes to the classification scheme would naturally follow.
Okay, that's to know, but yeah, and time frame obviously yet to be determined. Okay, thank you.
Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. Probably while you're speaking, Kent, I'm ignorant about the role of Te Uru Kahika. And I was just wondering, David, if you could just give us a little bit of an overview of the role, because here's me saying, well, you're representing all the regional councils, and I want you to represent the Waikato Regional Council and not those guys over the kaimais here and that sort of thing. So can you just give us a little bit of perspective?
I'll let Kent answer this because he's representative of Te Uru Kahika. Yeah.
Oh, am I?
Okay.
Okay, so Te Uru Kahika is the grouping of the regional and unitary councils in New Zealand. Yeah. Right? So essentially it's that industry group, if you like. The work on flood management comes under the River Managers Special Interest Group. So essentially this is the grouping of all the managers in regional and unitary councils from across the country. And what they're doing is trying to get movement at the national level so that the funding can flow through to each of the regional and unitary councils for them to do their thing according. So it's a coordination body, and you know, not like really it's there about making the case to central government. However, it's not a funding body, and it's not a control body. So it facilitates. That means that in the funding received from central government for Waikato Regional Council projects, those projects, that funding flows directly back into Waikato Regional Council. That doesn't come through.
Chris McClay, I might come to you. Do you want to input just how, well, just explain how we input into Te Uru Kahika? Seeing as that's you.
Yeah, hey, thanks for the explanation. It's very good, and of course Greg's part of the special interest group for the river managers, which inputs into this. And so yeah, Te Uru Kahika, it's an administrative arrangement for the chief executives on behalf of the sector. Where it's got interesting is that we've been able to leverage this relationship with central government by saying we need to work together on some of these as a system, and we just can't work in separate systems on it. I guess it's evolved to the point where we now start to say that there's been some funding rounds which has given money out for what regions have called their high-profile projects, but of course the future is going beyond that and saying actually what are the most, now we get these severe weather events, what are the most important projects for the country? You know, where do you absolutely need to protect communities and where are we protecting livelihoods and everything else? And so it's evolving, but I think it'd be fair to say that this part of Te Uru Kahika is probably the most mature and advanced for making sure the sector is working together instead of competing with each other to try and get the best deal out of the government. And the government's responded to it by saying, we like the model.
Thanks for that, Chris. And just hoping you picked up, Keith, at the fact that it's all the regional and unitaries. So obviously we also share the cost. So if you wanted them to just work for us, we'd be wearing more of the cost. So it's that amalgamation across the regional councils across the country.
Yeah, and for me, it's just trying to understand where the advocacy for funding goes through. So obviously it's going to go through this body.
Correct, and Greg has light in our council, right?
Yes, yes, so we speak to you about things like the full deluge funding that we have. We're working through in tranches at the moment, and we also provide you with an update of the kind of priorities that the river managers are working on. One thing we are looking is getting away from this tranche by tranche approach and a much more sustainable approach to partnering with the government.
Robbie.
My question's mostly to Janine, actually. So at the end, you know, if it all works fine and perfectly well, at the end of this, would we be able to get rid of some of those, we explain them as a
The
year
different
180 or whatever, or 800 rating units? Is it likely at the end of this?
Matching lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll
So-
be able to get rid of, we may be able to amalgamate those to get down to a lot easier rating model.
Yeah, I think as Kent has said, the intention probably at the end is a simplification of our rating system that actually reflects the understanding of potential beneficiaries. I think one of the challenges that we have at the moment is that each scheme has a different funding policy. And
Not about drainage. Or is it
so
targeted
from a
towards drainage? Yeah.
perspective, yeah, look, probably. And so I think it's probably lifting that funding up a level and looking at it more holistically, and definitely from the perspective of, you know, those different recipients of benefit, to see what it, you know, where those financial cards fall, when we look at everything through. But it should absolutely be a simplification from where we are at the moment. I think there's a key risk in the organisation in terms of who actually understands those funding schemes. Me, probably, maybe, on a good day.
Karen Boldenson was pretty good at it, and at some of it.
Yeah, Karen's obviously left.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think, you know, the understanding of it, and so therefore our ability to actually apply it and comply with it becomes a risk for us to carry on down here. I think important to note, though, as Kent said, for this coming LTP, we're not looking at a change in thing. And obviously, when we do get to that point, we need to think about a whole transition from current funding to a, because the impacts will fall quite differently. Yes.
Oh,
Just a point you made, we're funding the regional sector in addition to the LGNZ funding. Is it?
Yes.
Would that be correct?
For a long time.
Oh, okay. No, we'll talk some more about that in another day.
Is
Sorry.
executives.
Yes.
Yep.
I know. There's a bigger point.
And just to build on Janine's point too, I mean, obviously, we get very focused on rates because essentially those are the tools that we have in front of us today. That's the only way that we can fund things. However, David's work has illustrated that there are other potential non-rating funding mechanisms that we can use for a variety of different schemes and purposes. And this report goes into those in some detail. So yes, the revision of the rating system is kind of the natural outcome of this. And as Janine said, that's not necessarily going to be the simplest thing and will require a period of transition. But while it is occurring, the availability of non-rating funding will become very important. Now, the Crown is going to contribute, you know, obviously in the tranches thus far, has contributed 60% of capital, right? And we seem to be getting to the point where that's becoming a bit of a standard, if you like, you know, so we're not having to go back and re-argue that percentage each time out. We are having to argue it at each budget round, and what we're trying to get to through the Te Uru Kahika national work is the entrenchment of that so that it just happens that way automatically. So you'll be aware, for instance, that for local councils, roading has an agreed split between NZTA and the local council, and that's just kind of baked into the way that the sector operates. That's where we're trying to get to with the Crown funding of flood protection infrastructure, right? So that 60% is just baked in, and we know that's there because the next piece of work is to predict out what we're going to need for the next 30 years, rather than having to go cap in hand at every budget round and just argue for 1 year at a time. So that's the important thing. So if we have that movement towards that agreement with the Crown, that obviously affects how it plays out in the rating base. If there are other funding sources outside conventional rates that can be used for flood management projects, that also has an effect on ratepayers. So I'd kind of caution at this point, don't rush too quickly to say, what's the effect going to be on this general rate or that targeted rate? Because bringing that additional funding to the table will make such a huge difference to the region, both in terms of the deliverability of the projects, but also in terms of impact on ratepayers. Let's work through that process first, which is why we're not proposing making any change to this year's LTP, because there is additional money that we can potentially bring in from outside the traditional ratepayer base that will have a big impact, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And we have heard the Minister talk of a pipeline of funding in that long-term vision, yeah, that it's not banging on the door every 6 months or so.
In fact, we did provide as a sector, we did provide a pipeline to Infracom, the Infrastructure Commission, late last year of a 30-year plan. So that's kind of what the next phase is built.
But back to you guys.
Right. Like I said, you're gonna love this document. So what I want to do is just walk you through a little bit about the structure of the document before handing it over to you and letting you loose on it. It's basically in 4 parts. So the first part of the document is a document introduction. It's really about just setting the context for the thing. You can kind of just take that as read, the obvious stuff. Second section describes the opportunities and the challenges. Now, this you'll probably read and go, oh, look, that's really a statement of the blind and the obvious, you know, because we know all this stuff. Yes, you do, because you're seated around this table. But this is intended for the non-technical audiences, and ultimately this does become a public document, so it provides the context for people who have just picked this up and, for instance, won't know the extent of the assets or the degree of work that goes in from Waikato Regional Council. Now remember, one of the audiences for this is in fact Wellington. So there are a whole bunch of officials who simply don't realise the scale of flood protection infrastructure. Although recent storms in Wellington might help educate them on pluvial events. Anyway, so that's partly who that's written for. Don't pay too much attention to that. Just take it as read. Third section is the bit that's going to be really important. That's the valuation and analysis methodology. How do we decide who has cost and who has benefit, and how do we kind of work that out? Right? There's a fair bit of detail in there. And the fourth section is David's section, which talks about equity considerations, paying what's fair, and the funding possibilities outside, particularly outside rating. Okay? So that's the sections of the document. In the second section, the opportunities and challenges, once we get past the intro, what we're really doing is saying, here's the framework, particularly the legislative framework that we operate in within at the moment. Here's what we're going to need to spend over the next 30 to 50 to 100 years. And then it outlines what the challenges are, which are the ones that we all know about. Legislation, affordability, costs and benefits, land use change, climate change. So those are all the factors that are kind of feeding the monster that is, you know, flood management in a changing world as it is now. And then it sets out scope. It's a pretty simple part of the document. Section 3, the analysis methodology. This is one of the 2 bits that you really need to take a good look at, and we would value your input and your feedback and your insights as you do that. So we talk about the analytical process, how we go from modelling a flood in the GIS system through to how do we get dollar figures out of this. And it'll kind of walk you through that process. Shows you how we assess the impacts, and those impacts from tangible things such as we flooded this number of buildings, that many vehicles, did this kind of damage to the infrastructure, all the way through to the intangible things of saying, what are the effects on communities and individuals from that major flood event and how were their lives disrupted? How did that play out later? It shows you then how we quantify those. So everything is expressed in dollar equivalent terms. So what we're doing is we're saying, if it's an asset, okay, we understand assets in financial terms because assets, you just go buy the thing. A car is worth a certain amount of money, a building is worth a certain amount of repair cost. Roads are a certain number of dollars per kilometre. For the social valuations, however, we use a thing called social return on investment analysis, and that expresses things in dollar equivalent terms. It doesn't mean we go and buy and sell them. What it means is that those can be expressed as dollar equivalents. So you can see everything in a comparable way. And as I said, it covers assets, economic impacts, social impacts. So that's what that section does, kind of leads you through that part of it. A bunch of questions will probably occur to you as you go through that. If you want an immediate answer, email it into the team and we'll try and get back to you. If not, hold it over till the May workshop and we can discuss those things in more depth. Particularly if you go, I don't see how you got from here to there. Equitable funding.
Actually, before you kick off, David, and I'm
Yes.
really interested to see where the money's coming from. Gary, I think you might have had a question around something Kent just covered.
You just quickly, when you talked about the ROI and you earlier quoted the figure of 5 to 6, did that include then all those social? No, it didn't.
No. So that's
Purely cash flow.
Basically assets.
Oh, assets.
Yeah. So basically, so Infometrics, very good consultancy. But they're pretty conservative in the way they approach it. So what they actually valued was assets and a certain degree of direct economic impact. So they didn't really. So they said, if you flood a business, it affects that business. They didn't really take account of, what's the implications for the rest of the supply chain or the whole community. So those are only really the direct impacts. By the time you get to the indirects, the social costs, some of those numbers can get.
Yep. Okay, yep, that's good. No, just assets. So I'll keep that in the back of my mind.
Keith, same topic.
Thanks, Warren. Just in terms, so you talk about valuing the assets in that process and being aware of the Waikato situation. A lot of them are aging assets, and a lot of those assets are the roads and bridges that go over. Are they incorporated in a value in terms of what benefit they provide now, or what cost there is going to be because they need upgrading sooner rather than later?
The asset valuations are based on what they are worth today. And depending on the degree of damage, the valuation is either to repair it or replace it. What it doesn't take account of right now, because that's kind of a decision within each scheme, is how do we increase or maintain levels of service that are there today. So a good example is, and this happens across the country, where council goes to put in place a flood scheme, it makes a bunch of changes, and it turns out that the real problem is one of NZTA's bridges, Kiwi Rail's bridges. And so we have to kind of go or councils have to go cap in hand to Kiwi Rail and say, look, we really need to upgrade this bridge, because if you don't, it's going to create all these problems upstream. So it doesn't take account of that effect. That's the question about level of service and what we fund into the future. But it does recognise that if the rail line or the bridge is washed away, that has an asset value as it exists today.
Thanks. We'll jump in. I'm just conscious of time, Gary, so we'll jump into David's piece. I'm sure there's a lot more answers to your questions in the book.
So chapter 4 is on equitable funding, and first to discuss the equity element. So essentially we put forward 4 principles, and some of them we've touched on already. Beneficiaries pays principle. Those who benefit from the infrastructure should be contributing to the costs. Exacerbator pays principle you mentioned. Again, those who are exacerbating these risks should be contributing to the costs. Other 2 principles are a public pays element, which is implicit to regional infrastructure fund, and some of that funding coming from central government, that some of those costs should be spread across the nation in the wider sense. Also, ability to pay is a sense that, you know, those with the greatest wealth, including the private equity markets and so on, might actually play a role in contributing to some of this infrastructure because they hold those resources, and especially where that can benefit those communities who are disadvantaged and lack those resources. And so those are the four principles for a framework. And as a framework, it's not my job to tell you how to balance between those principles. That's to be done by political representatives. And so, you know, we're here to take that, take those signals from you. In terms of funding and financing instruments, as Kent was saying, there's a much wider suite of options than what we've currently been discussing. We've been talking about targeted and general rates as a, you know, beneficiary pays principle, where those costs are in the region or quite specific to landowners. Talking about public pays in terms of regional infrastructure fund. That's where most of the funding is coming from at the moment, instruments that fall under the beneficiary pays or the public pays instruments. And so there's a sense here, you know, what other instruments might be underutilized in terms of activating payments from exacerbators. Currently, there's really marginal instruments in that in terms of like biodiversity offsetting, maybe, you know, infringement fees for RMA. That's the sort of the sticks in that space, but there's arguably more to be done in that. And so they've explored some instruments that might contribute to that. Also, in terms of ability to pay, I mean, you know, private equity markets, private debt, very large. We're talking trillions of dollars globally. The challenge is how to activate that funding and financing, because private finance has particular expectations around risks and returns, and they don't map up very easily to adaptation, because you're often talking about infrastructure that avoids costs rather than generates profits. And so that's a sort of challenge. But again, there are instruments which are trying to thread the needle in that regard. And so I've taken a very wide view of the funding and financing instruments available. Just because I've included it, it doesn't mean I'm recommending it. It's really for you all to make assessments of what looks promising, what might fit the bill. And again, we can take these insights and feedback and integrate that into the later versions.
In the document itself, you'll find this lovely table, which is basically, think of this as where the money can potentially come from table. And then David's work drills into each of those and kind of discusses them in turn. That may be the topic that you folk want to focus on at the 11th of May session, along with some other things. So by all means, have a read. If there's anything in there that you're kind of thinking, I'm not even sure what that terminology means, just email, reach out. We will answer those questions as we go along. Okay, next steps. So the report is still in draft form. Okay, so this is not the final document. There are some bits in there that you'll look at and go, oh, look, this is the bit that says to be added. Analysis still to be completed. There's only a few of those, but get a sense of those as you go along. So physical copy will be provided. There is an email version if you prefer to look at it online. Next workshop is Monday, the 11th of May, and we've set aside 3 hours, subject to your guidance, is to talk through the ins and outs of that. Once we've got to that point and you're reasonably happy with the direction, we'll then look at the next phase of work, which is to begin building this in anger in the GIS systems itself, so that we can run some flood models, and we're going to be led by staff as to which models, where to do this particular piece of modelling, so that we can then come back to you and say, look, you can see in dollar terms where the impacts now spread from a flood event.
When you build the models, can you also look at the photos that were taken during the flood event and see that the models actually match up to what actually happened?
That's kind of a question for Peter Cochrane and the GIS team here, but I understand that a fair bit of work does go in to refine the models.
Okay, yeah.
We know how important ground testing is now, yes. Yeah.
And because we work nationally, we do see, you know, um, quite a bit of, what happens across other councils. There's that old joke, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And that's kind of the way it works. But I have to say, WRC looks very sophisticated in the way that it thinks about models, applies models, does the modelling. If you looked at some other councils that will remain nameless, their modelling goes, well, that's what happened in 1981 and we haven't updated anything since. So, yeah, and not all models are perfect, but you guys are a long way ahead of what we see elsewhere in the country. And as we've talked about, this then feeds into the work that is ongoing with Te Urikahika at the moment, the business case for the long-term funding. So stretching out beyond the immediate shovel-ready projects and giving them a 30-year pipeline, that's in development at the moment. That'll get tabled with the government sometime in the next 3 to 4 months, depending on the political environment. And we're hopeful that the 18.25 million that is in the request for tranche 3 should flow through after budget 26, oil crises notwithstanding. So, any further questions?
Looks like you've covered it. Oh, Gary, light on. Thanks, Gary. No, you haven't. No light. No, you see, I mute.
So let's be clear. I like you. I like what you were saying, especially when you said about the grants. Now, I take it that the grants that have been there are, and you say for government, public good, so much is put in. I just wanted to be clear to make sure that in that document there is the power dams, which when we turn these on, this argument was had 30 years ago, around about this time, 98, after the 98 flood. The power dam consents are coming up for renewal very soon. And it's rerun of the same show. So I just want to make sure that the ground rules haven't shifted to say, okay, now time's gone by, look, you've got this and that, but we're not going to carry on, and make sure that those those farmers that take that extra water, that extra 15% water in the Waikato River every day, and of the diversion of the the Whangamarino River is not accounted for. So I'm just raising it as a red flag, a highly blinking red flag, that it needs to be in that document, please. So
in the document itself, we don't talk like what we do talk about is exacerbator effects. So in other words, people who are not, who are contributing to the problem, basically. Because the document itself doesn't go into the flood modelling, it doesn't quantify yet the degree to which the dams are a contributor to subsequent flood events. But once the modelling is run, then you'll be able to see that effect. He said, making promises on behalf of Peter Cochrane and the GIS team, the degree to which that has been contributed to by others who are upstream. And therefore we can apportion that impact.
yes, why I'm being so forceful is that back in...
We don't need a history lesson, Gary.
No.
So read just... no, please don't. We don't need a history lesson. Yeah, no.
No, look, I was going to support you on that point. From 98, where it was a terrible situation and managed, to the most recent floods and river levels, it's been brilliant. So there's been huge improvement. So I think to look back at 98 now is out of context.
Thank you. Any other questions for Peter, Kent or David? No, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your presentation today. We eagerly look forward to your Bible, and no doubt.
Bestseller.
And we know you'll be waiting on the mini-series.
Yeah.
So, councillors, it's noted in the chat, but there is an email address that's been set up to collate any questions that you do have. So they will come in to the project team and we can share them through.
Can we have
So
a look?
following up on that, I would suggest you open the chat and write that email address in the cover of your Bible.
Funding
Can
review.
we, is there an electric version of it?
Yep, so
Yes,
we'll
thank you.
get that, yep, we'll get it through to you following this.
Thank
Can
you,
do that.
thank you so much for your time and your engagement.
Thank you.
Cheers, all.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks, Peter, online.
Thank you. Ka kite.
Absolutely.
Yep, sweet. Righto, councillors, the longer you chat, the longer this will take. So we'll get underway with the next item. And that is the update on the draft Whangamarino action plan. We have Mike at the end of the table there, Greg in the background. So it's all yours, Mike.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Chair. So the last time we talked about this with council was at a workshop in end of February. Since then, we've gone through a couple of iterations of the draft, including incorporating feedback we received from you at that workshop and a further round of feedback from the working group. I just thought it'd be good to give you an update. Our next step is really to take it out for wider consultation. There's a range of interested parties who are, I'm sure are really keen to have a look at it, and so far they haven't had that opportunity. So, Gordon, if we could have the slides, please. Yeah. So I won't spend too much time because I know you've had a very, very long day. And we've covered a lot of this before. So I'll just go on to the next slide, please, Gordon. Just to remind you all of who's been involved in plan development. So we've been working since April 2024 on developing the Whangamarino action plan. And that, just to remind you, the purpose of that plan is to identify actions within the catchment that are going to improve the health and well-being of Lake Waikato and Whangamarino wetland. So it's about actions that are going to improve health and well-being. You can see a wide range of people have been involved, and we've also engaged more widely with iwi and mana whenua. A lot of technical experts have had input, landowners, both rural and urban, and the wider community. So I think, Councillor Smith mentioned this at the Waikato Tainui co-governance meeting. There's been quite a lot of trust and relationship building happen around the table, and probably from a starting point where there was a lot of cynicism and lack of trust, I think we're getting into a good space. Next slide, please, Jordan. Just to remind you, these are the primary actions, and they're arranged into 3 different levels, which reflect how difficult they are. Starting at the bottom, what we call good management practice. These are things which we would expect people to be doing, and in many cases, people are already doing these things. We need more of that. The middle section are things that we might technically know what to do, We might have treatment systems, for example, or things that we know we can do around wetland restoration, but there are some really significant implementation challenges. And then the top of that triangle, the really pointy bit, is the transformational actions, the things that are really going to drive change in terms of health and well-being of the lake and the wetland. But they are extremely difficult. We're talking about afforestation of erodible hill country. We're talking about land use intensity within the catchment. We're talking about managing koi, carp as an impactor in the system. And we're talking about improving the management of floods and water levels right throughout the system to get better environmental outcomes. So that's sort of the context of the actions. Next slide, please. We're moving into, as we come to an end of developing the action plan, really starting to move into thinking about implementation. And obviously we've got implementation of the action plan as one of the measures in our strategic direction document that council signed off. So we're starting to think about that. And it's really heartening that everyone around the table in that working group wants to be part of that implementation phase. They also want to be involved in decision making, and that raises some questions around the governance. And so we're proposing principles of governance, because one of the things we heard from you last time was that it's not really for us to determine at the moment what governance structure should be. There were some good suggestions and feedback, but the primary principles that we're talking about are things like inclusion and having the right terms of reference so that everyone who's been involved in development has a stake in the catchment, has some say in that governance. We're talking about a suite of initial actions where we might focus implementation, and probably one of the important ones, which doesn't necessarily come with a price tag, but is really important, is all of the different agencies, all of the different groups working in the catchment need to integrate their work programs better. So Department of Conservation, ourselves, and other agencies working the fish and game, etc. We need to have a really good understanding of who's doing what and ensuring that we're not falling over each other in the catchment with our work programs. There is a real interest in in all of catchment approach to managing water levels. And I know, for example, with DOC and Fish and Game, thinking about the Whangamarino weir reconsenting, there is interest from them around how does water level, how do we best manage water level at a whole of catchment scale. Lake Waikato is in a very poor state and discharges down into Whangamarino wetland, causing a range of impacts. It's going to take a long time to improve Lake Waikato. So the thinking is, what could we do? And this would be, I guess, some scoping work around what could we do to reduce the impacts of that Lake Waikato discharge in the short term. Improving taonga species populations is important to a range of groups, and improving controls on invasive species. And we've particularly heard from council is that koi are a major issue that you would like to see action on. And because there is an important link in the action plan to Plan Change 1, whatever Plan Change 1 looks like, or whatever our regional plan looks like in terms of reducing contaminant loss from human land use, that's also going to play an important part in the action plan. Thanks, Jordan. Feedback from partners around that working group table is identified important that we align with the Whangamarino Ramsar review report that came out at the end of February. People wanted to see some clarity, a bit more clarity around the staging of actions and just the length of time that it was going to likely be taking to improve things, recognising the enormous amount of work to date, and I think that's a really important message for WRC and WRA because of the amount of investment that's gone into the catchment, and not to mention the work by landowners. We have to be careful that we're not minimising the efforts that have already been made. But it's certainly things need to ramp up. We've incorporated measures of success, so that helps us sort of paint the picture of where we think, what are the things, what are the improvements we're going to see in the short and long term, and also highlighting that some of the improvements with our current understanding are probably aspirational as opposed to directly achievable with current thinking and ways of working. We've incorporated a kaitiaki framework, so this has been developed to recognise the important role of mana whenua in the catchment, and we've had a number of conversations with landowners about the concerns they have. Next slide, please, Jordan. And just to highlight some of the feedback we heard from around this table back in February, there's a lot of work going on in our comms department on putting this into a much more, much, if I can say, sexier looking document than what Sean and I have produced. And WRC putting quite a lot of effort into that positive messaging around the work done to date. Considering innovation and emerging technologies, I think, we've had some conversations about technologies, and I know this has come up for the hydro lakes as well, around using ultrasonics for reducing cyanobacterial blooms. But there's a range of technologies that we are looking at. We've included outcomes, and so that's these measures of success, the things we expect to see, and also highlighted, I think that was Councillor Cookson's comment about not all of the parts of the catchment have the same issues and the same actions that need to be applied. So there are some places where we'll focus primarily on sediment control, and other places we might need to focus more on invasive species control, for example. And I think finally the increasing push for more action around koi management, and so that's something that's coming through. I think we're sort of putting that more strongly into the action plan. And then I think the final slide around the next steps is we're looking to get the final draft out for stakeholder interested parties to have a look at. We're planning a couple of open days, probably based out of Te Kaupara, for people to come along and talk to us about this. We're also looking at the working group coming together for a focus session on managing koi, as we've done previously with sediment and the infrastructure side of things. We are looking to get the working group we'll revise the draft, seek the working group consensus in our June meeting, and then bring it back to council here for your endorsement, and if need be, another workshop prior to that council meeting at the end of June. And as I say, we're continuing to develop up the implementation plan, thinking about what could we do in the next financial year, so starting from 1 July, then also what might we be able to package up in terms of the long-term plan. We're already thinking about funding proposals to Waikato River Authority for their funding round that ends in August of this year, and it's really good to see that there's a group Department of Conservation, ourselves, and Waikato, Tainui and Mana Whenua looking to come together to bring that together. So that's everything I had, just to give you an update. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Mike. Ben.
Yeah, a couple of questions. I haven't been involved in this for a while, but you're concerned about nitrogen, phosphorus, and invasive species. Where do ducks, geese, and swans fit into that in terms of nitrogen into the lakes?
This is a question everywhere around the country where I've been involved with lakes, and whether that be Southland or Rotorua or here, people always raise the issues of, you know, Canada geese, swans, ducks. Yes, they do contribute nutrients into the system, but it tends to be a very small fraction of the total catchment load.
Okay, but there is some.
There is some. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I noticed that as part of the timeframe, all landowners need to implement farm plans. Should Fish and Game be deemed a landowner, given that they are responsible for, they're being funded to birds there? They make money out of it. So do they fit into this thing, and do they need to have some kind of farm plan or action on
It's a good point, actually. I think
They're farming ducks.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think what I would hope is that as we develop these coordinated programs of work, I think there was a comment earlier in the week, Councillor Holmes, that, and I think Noel, you've said the same thing, is Fish and Game have been an active participant in the working group, but we haven't heard a lot about what they do and how they do it and how they might do it differently in future. So I think there is an opportunity for us to talk to Fish and Game about what is it that they do. Unfortunately, at the last meeting where everyone was sharing their work programs, both Fish and Game people were away sick, so they didn't share that information. But I think it is a fair comment, and yeah, I'd be
they
very
make
keen.
money out of?
Yeah, I'd be very keen to follow up on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Second point is page 89. Your governance includes mana whenua, landowners, local community, potentially youth rangatahi, as well as regional council, river authority, Tainui, Waikato District, Dock, Auckland Fish and Game. I mean, how are you possibly going to get governance arrangements with that many people, or with diverse things? And have you got any strategy for that?
I would be keen to have some guidance from you as our governors. Of course, you are all, particularly Gary and Noel, representing that community around this table. So I would like the idea of an inclusive group that oversees the work programs. If that's the ultimate decision maker or not, I'm not sure. In terms of WRC and what WRC might invest in or plan to invest in, that clearly sits with you. It doesn't sit with a group made up to manage that implementation of that action plan.
Well, when you've got rangatahi and youth coming in as well, you could have 40 people in the room, and if they're going to be the decision maker, that would need to be thought through.
Yeah.
And then just finally on that, in terms of the governance structure, it would include co-design of governance and tikanga-based decision-making procedures. So how do you define that, given that we've just had a strategic workshop that talked about evidence-based, transparent decision-making? You know, how do you define that as part of your governance regime?
I think having different people around the table, even if they're not in the ultimate decision-making sphere, having those different perspectives around the table is really valuable. as I say, I don't think we've nailed that, and nobody has sort of provided a really clear picture. I think that's part of in terms of the implementation plan, it's something we've got to get sorted over the next 12 months is how does DOC or WRC or WDC or WRA, how do they as organisations deal with the fact that there's a wider community of interest who want to have a say in how things are done?
Are you signalling you'd like guidance on how a governance structure should be set up, or what are you looking at for here?
Well, we proposed in the original draft, we proposed a suggested governance structure, and the feedback we had from this table was that didn't want a whole new governance structure because of the cost associated with that. So, yeah, I am very open to suggestions on what the appropriate governance structure should be.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Warren. And Ben basically covered off the things that I wanted to cover off. And obviously, you know, I was going to say, you know, Mike, that I have an interest in duck shit, but I don't have an interest. I don't like this shit. So I think all I'd establish is that I sat through one of those meetings, the action group, and I was really interested in Fish and Game's role. And they were basically very quiet, trying to let everything go over the surface, over their heads. And I think they need to be held to account. And maybe you'll raise it, Noel, about the duck ponzi, but they are not doing anything to help our situation there. Ben's raised it about the tikanga, excuse my pronunciation, decision making. It's fraught with difficulties, and maybe we can help you with that. The other part that I've struggled with is, and in your document, and I understand you're bringing ideas together, is Karakia, and again my pronunciation, Tai Ayo, is a means of, to me, it's an inexact science, and it goes back to what Ben's saying, is that unless it's defined, I can't accept it in the document. It needs to be defined what was actually meant with it. Otherwise, it's pull something out of the air, and it's called Karakia Taio, and I don't think that's fair on all participants when we're trying to nail it down to a point of, you know, particularly when it comes down to decisions and you know, projects and all that sort of thing. So I think that's needs sorted. So that's my points at this stage. But at the same time, as I said in my email, I really appreciate the huge difficulty of the job of you've had of pulling it all together, and you've done an excellent job on that.
No.
I don't know how long you've got, but first of all, I see Fish and Game as the sheep and wolf's clothing. For 2 years it sat there, and any time I've spoken about and challenged what is Fish and Game going to do, and Mike, you've said that they don't contribute much with their birds and whatever. The reality is that they contribute, and their silence has been deafening, and they may be at the table, but they haven't participated, in my view, at all meaningfully. They've sat there, listened, and I suspect them to come back defensive as hell. They are, I think, the second or third largest landowner in that catchment. They've bought some of the Whangamarino. They've dug ponds, they've dug channels, and of course they're promoting the breeding of birds, which settle on the lake and pollute. And they've shown no inclination to move in a direction that would benefit the ecosystem. I have held back for probably a few months now of getting too involved in the final, because I didn't want a conflict between signing this off and so what. But in all honesty, this document's fraught with a whole lot of problems. And the the group that has taken part in around the table, not the technical group. Those were the experts that were there to support. But we had the landowners threatening to walk away because they thought they weren't being listened to. I think some work has been done to get them back to the table or stay at the table more so. We had community liaison person appointed, and sadly, because of it being this is my personal view, sadly, person employed to do the work with the community, being a member of the community, the lines of advocacy as an individual, as opposed to collating and delivering the community message, in my view, is challengeable. So this whole thing has given rise to aspirations, which it should. But again, I go back to my earlier comments throughout the process, where we need to lift this up to the governors, the skin in the game. And I'm not saying that the community doesn't have skin in the game, but if you put a whole lot of different people in the community at the table, then again, it comes back to, we're round in circles. So to me, I see if anything's going to happen here, we need to have the governors, which are the likes of the council, iwi, district council, DOC, and that's about it. And then you have an advisory group below that. When we come to I refer to the triangle, which has the really aspirational stuff at the top, the pointy end of the business. Then the second tier, which is, I believe, should be included. Then you've got the bottom layer, which is, to my mind, business as usual, and it shouldn't really form part of the plan at all, because that's what's being done now, or should be being done anyway, planting, riparian planting and all those sorts of lower level stuff. So it comes to, if we adopt the top two layers, which is, I think, the critical part of it, then we really need to understand what that means. And it means a hell of a lot of money, which this council doesn't have. So collectively, we need to have a program to actually see if we can get off the ground to hit that aspirational stuff. And it's mega millions of dollars. And in fact, the cost of over $1 billion has been put on this by various people. So I don't think we should be getting into a group of people taking this plan very far in the next 12 months, because we should be doing work on whether what's aspired to can actually be achieved and by whom. And therefore, I want to see a different approach to this. Now, I could go on for a lot longer, and I can take this offline happily, but the reality for me is I just don't honestly feel that I'm not sure if I've added any value, but I stood there and said, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to challenge what's being said and ask for clarification of what's intended. And maybe that was the wrong thing to do, but having listened, basically a whole lot of low-level people sitting around a room having a discussion, and it's all very well having aspirations, but somebody has to drive it from up here. And this group down here is not the group to do it. It's up here, the skin in the game, the guys with the dollars and cents. So I see anything that what Mike's suggesting through this plan is an advisory group from the community. That's about it. Look, well, I could go on, but I don't want to take up all the time. So I don't think what the document says at the moment is where we should be. But again, I'm only one voice, and there was about 20 around the room. And I will repeat, the relationships, I think, have been the most, to me, the relationships are the success out of this work. And that's Mike's to be commended for pulling all those people together. But the reality is, it's too low. Stuff at the top that needs to really be done to make a difference, to get that late. And then I read articles, 16th of April, about all the dams upriver that have got all that green stuff growing in it. And, maybe it's too simple to say, let the dams go and let the water clean out and refresh, because we've slowed it all down for enable, so it's a whole system. And this is what we talk about. It's from Taupo to the port. It's not about little bits. And whilst this is 8,000 hectares, it's still only a very small part of a huge catchment. So I'm not sure that we've actually got this. It's like the WRA. They started off funding things, but it was all over the place. Now they have got a more or a much better program where their work is linked and therefore the outcomes will be greater. So I'm just wondering, I don't want to see a waste of investment. I know the chief executive has a KPI to have this done by 30 June, but that's no reason to put up something that's really not quite right. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Gary.
I suppose I agree with most of that rambling. But to answer, Ben, the point you raised also about the ducks, and you asked about nitrogen and phosphate, the issue really is around E. coli. And, in the work we got presented, only 50% of the E. coli is in a high rain event from bovine, rest of it's from bird life. So I think, so I agree with the points. Very much I'm concerned that we actually have the poacher as being the gamekeeper in here, and I actually would include Doc in that. And I've got to say I'm pretty ignorant on it because I didn't even know about the Whangamarino and anything else before I got on this council, so I'm new to it. But when you start talking about weirs and things like that, exactly, I know that, but I live in a small bubble. So I look at that, and I do have real concerns when you talk about the governance and you want some guidance on governance. Real concerns about what I'd call the poachers being part of the gamekeepers, and I'd say Doc and Fish and Game are very much in that camp in my mind. So we need some work around that. And the other thing that I'd also say is, if we keep doing the same thing and getting the same result, you've got to ask who's stupid here. And so I think we need to open it up to what Noel's also saying, the whole scope of it. And so, I know Gary Maguire goes on about the koi carp, and I start seeing the stocking rates and reading all the issues around sediment, re-agitation of things in that. I just wonder whether we need to put a fresh set of eyes over it and start using some good science to make sure that we get the right outcomes. So two things, making sure that we do use science, that we look at the right elements and the right predators, and also who are actually going to be the governors of this.
Right, if I can sum it all up, you've got the next steps there. Obviously, this is going to go out to the interested parties. Well, this is just next step. So this is, you're an interested party and you're seeing it early before the rest of them. So I don't believe we're here to make a decision on whether this goes any further or not. Now, my understanding is the next step of it is to go out. So you have a working group there to support a focus session on managing koi. I think that's a plus. So thank you for taking that on board. I'm not sure who's in that working group. So whether you can.
It's the whole 25 people.
Okay, right. Good luck with that. Right. So then we come to revise draft and seek working group consensus early June. So is this a time for more council feedback? And I'm just thinking more so, not so much around what's here in the plan, because that to me comes when you look at how the implementation is going to go, where the funding's coming from, all that sort of thing. But around that, looking at what bodies are going to oversee this going forward, whether there's an advisory committee and a governance committee and that sort of thing. Is that in that June 25 council meeting? I'm just trying to see where, or is that early June as we get some of the feedback from the other interested groups? I'm just trying to see in my mind how this comes together, how council has more input. Obviously, you're looking for some direction from us around the governance sort of role, and then perhaps a wider advisory role, which seems to make sense to me. But I'm just looking for that feedback, Mike.
Because for this plan to be finalised, we need consensus from the working group, but we also need your approval for it to go out the door as a WRC document, recognising that it's a whole group of people have worked on it.
Yep.
So what I've heard is very much that the governance, how this is managed going forward is really important. And so I think, yes, we would perhaps at a workshop in June, if we can find space for that, we would talk about, here's what we've heard from the wider community, the interested parties, and Councillor Raymer's point, the science. So we'll have dairy and Z, sheep, beef and lamb, fed farmers, and a whole bunch of other people who will be, I think, very keen to give us feedback. They haven't had a chance yet. And that will include some of those different science perspectives. So we can bring that back into a workshop in June and perhaps focus more on what's the appropriate advisory / governance approach.
So are you looking to ask that question of the other, of the working group?
So we do need to get working group consensus on the final version.
Yep.
So yeah, perhaps.
So in the final version, will that outline the governance for the implementation?
My thinking would be we might need some different options. So from what we've heard, everybody around the table wants to be involved in a decision-making role going forward. And as Councillor Smith identified, that isn't really necessarily that isn't going to be workable, because not everyone around the table has the same governance experience, financial clout, skin in the game.
I think we all recognise that, yes, certainly advisory and input, but when it comes down to governance.
So we could put some options into that final version to test with the working group. But because WRC, DOC, other organisations are the ones who are going to be potentially financially contributing, they should be the ones with that final approval say.
Okay. Looks like we've got a couple of quick questions. I do want to sort of wind this up, Ben.
Yeah, I think personally, before this document goes out to the other groups, you should rewrite the governance section, page 88 and 89, and talk, as Noel has, about advisory groups rather than governance, or provide options in there. Because if you send it out like it is, they're all going to go, we're on the governance group, we're going to be making decisions.
Well, if we change that, we should take that back out to the working group and give them a say on that change. And what that will do is push out the opportunity for others in the community who haven't yet had a chance to say, probably another month. So my view would be, this is the version that goes out to interested stakeholders for their comment, recognising that that the question of governance isn't resolved.
So you're saying that the working group has already read this document?
The working group has had 2 cracks at this document. Right. You've now had 2 cracks at it.
Okay. And how much are we held by Chris McClay's KPI that this has to be done by June? Because at the moment, I wouldn't sign off on this in June, current form, or
it hasn't had any community consultation yet. And I would hope that you would want to see community consultation on it.
Well, you're actually working to a final working group council approval of the action plan by 30th of June.
Yep. And because we've lost at least a month, that is looking tight, but that is still the deadline we're working to.
Can we extend that deadline?
That's up to you.
I mean, that's fine, because I'm just mindful also you're talking about the issues here, but of course PC1's going to roll along and that's going to bring the whole thing up again. So
Liz.
I'm just watching Noel. He's getting redder and redder as the day goes on. We don't want to. No, we're not having heart attacks. So coming in really fresh with this, the governance and the person who's chairing those meetings is really critical. Bring someone in fresh, bring someone who's going to keep driving the group, but is independent, completely independent, if you can. So that's maybe a conversation for our workshop. And also the comms around this. You can't have good community consultation if your comms plan or the information or hardly anyone turns up. I mean, it just needs to reach those corners of people and owners and people in the area who perhaps don't even know about this project. So we've got a good comms team here. Let's get some really good advice and maybe help have them feed into the workshop as well.
Point I made at the very first meeting.
Thanks, Liz. Robbie?
Yeah, it's, I don't know if it's worth saying anything because.
Okay, then don't.
No, but what I'm meaning is this, what Mike's saying, this draft has to go out as is. I've got an opinion on it, but what's the point? Because what I'm, because I'm agreeing that the governance role in this, I believe in this, is us, DOC, Fish and Game and iwi, and River Authority. That's the governance group. Well, maybe, yeah, okay, blah, blah. But I've got the groups that we've been talking to there for that 25 members or whatever that we've been sitting there for 2 years with, 2.5 years with, they're all vital to implement getting out there and getting the work done. And I really struggle with you come back with a budget that we may want up to $200,000 a year for a governance, I'd rather see that money put into the catchment and more money doing actually the work, getting the groundwork done and giving us time to go to central government and others to see if we can find 10, 20, $30 million to start implementing a plan. And I think that's what Noel's trying to say, is we're not against it, but we don't want to set up a governance group that's want to implement a plan that we can't do it.
And I think if you look at the last line up there, that leads to what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I think as far as next steps go from my read, actually I'll come to Chris McLeod because you wanted to say something, Chris, sorry.
So what I was going to say is we need to get this right. I mean, I look at your strategic direction. You have listed this in your strategic direction that you want to implement this successfully. So we've got to be able to do that. If you see a major roadblock is we haven't got the governance right, so we're not going to be able to successfully implement your strategic direction, that is right for you to be able to have that conversation. And if my KPI is getting in the way of that, let's have that discussion. I'm not worried about it. This is far more important than my KPI, the end of year performance outcome. What I don't want to do is just go out and do something which is going to cause angst with the community or other people who have invested a lot of energy into getting to this point unnecessarily. That causes a spin-off down the line, which is also going to mean that we're not going to successfully do this in a time frame that you might be looking at. But so we'll take your guidance. Mike's advice is that you should go out there, working groups and a whole lot of stuff, and get some feedback on it and try and deal with the governance matter. Signal that there's a governance issue being raised here. Maybe try and deal with it. But please don't let my KPI get in the way of what you think is the right thing to do.
Yep, thanks for that clarity, Chris. Right, so I think we're all clear of where we're going with this. Excellent, people. So this, as basically you have your working steps here, but there will be a workshop that will come in prior to that June 25 council meeting. Yes. And potentially, if we're getting feedback, I mean, maybe there could be something at the end of May. That's yep. But there's a prior workshop prior to that, if needed. Now that workshop could be the end of May once we get feedback back from the working group. Okay. Beauty. Yeah, no, look, as Chris McLeod just outlined, exactly. It's critical. If it misses a KPI, it misses a KPI. That we'll deal with that in SEC. Yep. Okay. Clear?
Very good.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. No, one more to go. Wave through the window. Right, next one up is the WRC framework and plan for resilience to natural hazard risk. All yours, Greg.
Thanks, Warren. Kia ora, councillors. Look, appreciate this is the end of a long session for you, so we will keep it nice and snappy for you. You'll be aware that we do get engaged in a lot of work around natural hazards, helping our community to figure out how they're going to adapt to all the changes that they're facing over the next few decades. One of our challenges that we do have limited resource to bring to the table, and a lot of demand happening, a lot of planning happening outside of what we do as well. So a lot of TAs looking at getting projects underway. Up until this point, we have been, I guess, relatively responsive to what's needed, but it is putting a strain on what we need to do, and we need to be a lot more proactive. We need to focus our efforts on where the risk is greatest, and make sure that we are planning well for how we involve ourselves in this adaptation work program that we get involved in. So Lisa and Dave are here to take you through the first part of our thinking, which is really to focus on the prioritisation framework that we're proposing. This is to help both us and also to give an indication to our adaptation partners about the approach that we'll be taking, so that they can also plan their work programs in collaboration with us. Thanks, Lisa and Dave. I'll hand over to you.
Yes, thanks, Greg. Kia ora, Chair and councillors. Just firstly, I'll introduce obviously Lisa. Lisa, you may have met in previous workshops, but if not, Lisa is the project manager for this piece of work. We've also got Emily O'Donnell online, recently minted as the team leader for regional resilience, so she is the program manager. In previous papers, I've talked about the Adapting to Natural Hazards and Risk program. This is one of the 17 projects. So just to provide a bit of context, it's part of a much bigger piece of work, but it is perhaps the most important part. It's how do we prioritise resourcing and how do we focus our efforts in the right places. So the purpose of today's workshop is to give you an overview of how the project is tracking. It's not complete, but it will give you an update as to where we've got to, and what are the issues and potential options moving forward. We'd also like some feedback. If there isn't time for full feedback, we'll give you an opportunity to provide that feedback in writing. We'll send this pack out after the presentation. And then we also just want to talk about what we'll be doing in the future in terms of further engagement, particularly with yourselves, to get to a point where we've got an agreed approach for the region. Next slide, thanks. So just three things to bear in mind. The scope obviously was one of the key considerations. There was a wide group of people across WRC involved in discussing exactly what this framework and prioritisation approach was attempting to do. I guess our first point is to really focus on the issue of risk reduction. So what I'm saying here is we're working on the preemptive approach. What will we do and how will we help communities to prevent issues from occurring through natural climate hazards? There are other responses, I guess, to climate change. We've got reactive responses through emergency management measures, and of course the ensuing recovery measures as well. So the scope of the project is not to look at those aspects particularly. And also as well with climate impacts, we can have impacts across a wide range of things. Our interest here is primarily communities, people, security and safety, and also preserving the use of land for productive reasons. Obviously all natural hazards are in consideration. Obviously climate change induced and geological. So we've had a number of events this year, four, I think to note, one a month. And we, in response to that, have identified a number of things that we could do differently. I think land slippage is one of those areas that we are needing to think about and work more actively with civil defence and other technical partners to understand better what we can do with that. So that's just one of the many things that we're starting to get our heads around and think about how we're going to respond to. Next slide, please, Jordan. You may have seen the slide in numerous presentations, and again, it's just to reiterate the reason why we're doing this. Many communities are reasonably well prepared. They've got a broad suite of responses to climate change and impacts.
But there are other communities like the illustration there of number 5 who have got very limited response. They rely on river and catchment management being done well, and also that they've got strong and robust emergency management measures, but very little in the way of infrastructure. We see that particularly in the Otahonga area, which we talked to in February. So it's important we understand who is at risk and what the severity of that risk is before we invest time and effort in supporting that. Next slide, please, Jordan. And I think we also talked about this slide in the Otahonga event, where the frequency of occurrence is significantly higher now than in previous years. You can see there data tracking back in this particular rain gauge station from 1920, how the number of events or count per year has increased in terms of rainfall over the average of 42 mils. So this is consistent throughout the region. We're seeing more and more intensity and severity of flooding, as we've mentioned. So obviously we've got some areas of the region that are highly vulnerable, particularly Coromandel, but also the low-lying areas like Karakia Plains, for example. Next slide, please, Jordan. And I guess the challenge for us is in understanding adaptation and what our role is. There is still some uncertainty in terms of adaptation and what WRC's role should be. We've got some particular skills, and we've been applying those particularly in the modelling area and technical support through Mike's team. But that demand is growing, and I think I've mentioned this before. We've got 11 district councils, all with the appetite to do more in the adaptation space. And when we're seeing with Karakia District Council in particular, the demand creating about 4,000 hours of WRC staff time, if you multiply that by the number of district councils, you can see the demand is quite significant. And so we need to think about how we prioritise it. We don't know yet what the outcome of the legislation that's pending will be, and that may dictate we have a greater or lesser role. But I guess given the information we have now, we do have to make some calls and proposals around where we will invest time. Last slide. Thanks. So in summary, I'm going to hand over to Lisa to cover off the prioritisation approach. And I'll give you a graphic to work through. We've got a few other, I guess, reasons for doing this. We've got a strategic direction that's very clear now in terms of the need for us to ensure the region is resilient, and it's of equal priority with all of the strategic outcomes that we're looking to achieve. The reality of increased natural hazard risk, I think, is very clear. And I mentioned 4 events to note this year, which has put a lot of demand on this particular council, both in terms of response and the recovery. And that leads us to the need for making sure our finances are allocated in a prudent way. And in particular, when we're looking at investment in infrastructure, have we got the priorities right is the big question. Are the investments we're making delivering the outcomes that we need for community safety and security? Of course, we want to make sure we've got efficiency, and in that regard, we're looking at not just the built infrastructure, but our work with river and catchment teams, and to make sure that we're connected in a way that says we're doing all of the right things throughout the system or the scheme. As has been noted actually in this meeting, it's a whole of system solution that we're looking for. And I guess the tricky part to this is getting people aligned. We know there's going to be a big demand for engagement and communication. We've already begun to think about that. That's a separate project, and that will follow on from the completion of this one. But it is one we're beginning to think about because that will be extremely important. And of course, reform through legislative change. We have some insights, but of course, we're still waiting to see what impact that will have. So some uncertainty is still influencing our thinking at this stage, but we will be clearer, I guess, by the time we finish this piece of work. Okay, I may stop for any questions before I hand to Lisa. Hi, Lisa, I think you're up. Oh, good.
Right.
Just whilst Lisa's talking, I'll just hand out one of the graphics, which is a little bit difficult to read.
Thank you. So kia ora koutou. So I'm Lisa Armstrong, as Dave mentioned. I'm the project manager and also the main person holding the pen for this piece of work, but drawing, of course, on the wealth of expertise that we've got across council in this space. So I'll cover quickly what exactly this project is going to deliver, and Dave's covered the why we're doing it, and then talk in a bit more depth about the prioritisation approach. So first, a key part of the project is the establishment of a resilience and adaptation advisory group. So that's an internal cross-directorate advisory group with a focus on resilience and adaptation. And so its purpose is to provide strategic advice and cross-organisational alignment on resilience and adaptation. The second piece of, I guess, project output is the framework and plan for resilience to natural hazard risk. And so that is intended as an internal piece of work to guide WRC activities. But we recognise that it's also, probably quite a lot of importance to our stakeholders to understand our approach and our high-level plans. So externally, we've identified in particular TAs, civil defence, emergency management, and iwi partners as specific partners with a key interest in this work. So how we carry out our work and what we've got planned is highly relevant to planning and resourcing their own work programs, and of course working together as efficiently and effectively as possible across the region. So this diagram that's currently up on the slide essentially sets out what the framework and plan will cover. So there's two components to it. There's the framework, which is really setting out how we will approach resilience and adaptation. So it's guiding WRC's organisational response to risk reduction and adaptation. It'll also include a prioritisation approach, which is one of the key things we'd like your feedback on today. And we'll also set out how we'll work with others. In the report itself that was shared for this workshop, you can see some more of the detail and the content outline for the framework and plan, and you'll see that we're also noting, the progress that we've made to date and across council and working in this space, because we have actually, collectively achieved quite a lot through the program and other work programs. The plan component of the framework and plan will be setting out what we are proposing to do. So it's going to take a council WRC-wide view of priority, actions, work and information needs, both over a short, medium and long term. And so it will draw on the strategic direction, the key, I guess, best practice approaches in the framework, and also the things that we must do. So those legislative requirements, which will then in turn feed through to potentially internal changes and how we work perhaps, and also, LTP and enterprise work management processes. So they are, of course, outside of this project, but the project will essentially bring together recommendations for those. Next slide, thanks, Jordan. So there are a few key, I guess, timeframes that I'd like to highlight for you. And one change that you will see from the workshop report is that we're now proposing to come back to you for our second workshop on the 4th of August, and then to publish the framework and plan also in August. This is a change from what is proposed in what was originally planned in the report, which had planned that the framework and plan would be adopted by the end of June. We're taking this currently through change management processes for our project, because the weather events have really had a significant impact on a lot of the people that need to contribute to this work. So that's one change from the report that you received. We're currently at the start of the engagement process. So we've developed the engagement approach that was included in your workshop agenda pack. We've got the workshop today. Next steps are developing the draft framework and plan, and a second workshop with you to provide feedback on the full framework and plan, with further edits, and then aiming to adopt and publish the framework and plan by August this year. Throughout all of that, we were planning to carry out engagement with both internal and external stakeholders. So of course, our own WRC SMEs, subject matter experts across all of council that in some way contribute to risk reduction, iwi partners, TA adaptation, staff, and of course, civil defence. So we have, we've been working with Tairanga Whenua to identify iwi communication, iwi partner communication channels, and we're providing an update to the Chief Executives Forum this Friday, and also we'll be speaking at the Waikato Combined Forum about this work. And we've already held an initial introduction to this project with TA adaptation staff. Next slide, thanks. So you'll see before you, and actually, Dave, have you handed out the, oh, fabulous. So anyway, this handout that you've just received is essentially setting out the process and some of the key inputs and outputs to it. And so I'll give you an overview of the key points around this slide and the process, and invite any feedback. As I take you through it, feel free to ask questions at any stage. So the process itself and the approach that we're proposing builds on work initially developed by Otago Regional Council. We've incorporated our own learnings and experience from the adaptation projects that we've contributed to across the region, and also the National Policy Statement for Natural Hazards and ISO 31000 standard for risk management. So it's currently a working draft, and you'll see that there are noted within the document some aspects that we still need to resolve and work through. And it may well be that because this is quite a complex piece of work, that, you know, as we're actually working, you know, we'll do a proof of concept and just test and refine it as we go. But I mean, the principles, general principles, will stay the same and are sound. So in terms of where we're at currently, you'll see the yellow box at the top, which is definition of the prioritisation approach. So that is where we are now. So the process itself is an 8-step process that will take us through until, and then identify priority locations and pieces of work that will then help inform either our business as usual, our LTP, or inform others. In terms of other ways we may use the process, as Dave mentioned, to help, number one is to help inform the investment of WRC resources. So, you know, we don't have enough resources to respond to every adaptation request. So, you know, this piece of work will help us ensure that we're focusing on the highest risk areas, or also where we identify where we don't actually hold enough information to understand the risk profile of a particular community. We'll also be able to integrate the prioritisation results with other work across prioritisation work across WRC. So, for example, we'll be spatially identifying, you know, high risk locations across the region, and you know, we can then overlay that with other high priority prioritisation work. So, for example, priority areas that are identified through the Waikato Catchment Management Framework or biodiversity strategy work, and then that allows us to actually go, okay, well, where are the places in the region where we can actually get double bang for our buck in terms of where we're investing our money and resources. It's not just money; it's people's time and effort as well. The other key use for this piece of work is informing, identifying locations for adaptation planning, which is a requirement for the future regional spatial plan. So we see this as a key piece of work to inform that. It may need some adjustments as, you know, legislation is landed, but, you know, this is, you know, work that we can do in preparation. It also will help us align and integrate with the work planning of our partners and identify where priorities intersect. So also, I guess, efficiencies. And also, you know, by having our plan and work program set out in a public document, you know, it'll be really clear to our partners where we can integrate and work more effectively together. So I guess just a couple of other key points about the process that you see in front of you. So on the left are the inputs that we need to essentially deliver the prioritisation process. So there's both qualitative and quantitative data sources. So qualitative is essentially some of the expert opinion that is around within WRC and across the region. The quantitative is more, some of the actual flood modelling, the coastal inundation modelling that we can use to then actually quantify and calculate what is exposed to a particular hazard. In terms of the outputs, ultimately we'll get a prioritisation register that will show us a range of locations across the region that we've prioritised, sort of from high to low or 1 to 5. And then the very first step, which we have built in, will also essentially help us rapidly, which is we've called a rapid qualitative assessment, will help us quickly identify right at the start of the process any key areas where we think are high risk and there is the opportunity to improve the risk management approaches there. And those are, for example, the steep catchments that might be prone to flash flooding and debris flow. And we also have a final step, which is considering enabling factors. So these are additional things that might contribute to the success of a particular project or hazard management approach. So this considers additional social, economic and political enablers that may ensure success. So it may be that, there's external funding available, a TA is ready to go, it's a range of examples included in that consideration of enabling factors. And I guess the final point to make is that, this is a continuous review process. So it's going to be an iterative, repeated process because there will always be new hazard data, new research that becomes available that improves our understanding of what's at risk and when. And likewise, more element data. So to understand what's at risk, you need to have suitable data on, the buildings across our region or the roads. And some of that information is, not readily available electronically. But I know there are also national pieces of work underway to help improve that. So over time, some of that understanding will improve.
If I can stop you there, Lisa. It seems to me, I know part of the idea of putting this piece of work together is the fact that the pressure on our resource with different TAs coming to us and wanting adaptation plans and that sort of thing, and we've seen that grow and grow, and your map showed that. But it also seems to me that we're actually going out and looking to do work. List areas requiring urgent work. I read through the prioritisation approach, and we seem to be going out and trying to identify a lot of these things. Now, I know we spoke about risk earlier today, but Greg, I guess my question to you potentially is, is this a really urgent requirement that we need to be doing to actually start to identify risk areas, high hill country, et cetera, et cetera? Are we legislated to be out there doing that? Is this, or is this an add-on?
So, yeah, sure. Thanks, Warren. So we do have a role, and we do have different roles coming through legislative reform that's working its way through the process. I guess the focus on this is not necessarily looking for work to do, but what we want to do is take a region-wide approach to this, to understand the different risks that are out there affecting our different communities, so that we can then understand with the resources that we have available where we should be putting those. As I said, we have had to be reasonably reactive to where there's opportunities to get involved in community adaptation. This is about actually stepping back from that, understanding what the regional picture looks like, and then being really clear about how we prioritise the work. And likewise, it helps those who are looking at doing adaptation plans, such as TAs, to also understand where our priorities they can align our planning. So it's not looking for work, but it is looking for risk. So we have that decent region-wide picture of where the risks are and where the most significant needs are. That first step around the urgent work is also really reflecting that we do have events that happen from time to time, and sometimes that does raise risks that we may have not been aware of previously, or may not have had an idea of how significant they were. So it allows that flexibility and agility to adjust when things happen.
Yeah,
so my other, sorry, before you go, Liz, my other part of it too is we seem to be looking for a lot of external input into this now. To me, this is our framework. This is our plan, we just need to put it in place, like how much external feedback do we need from iwi communities, etc., about our own process. To me, we're focusing, it seems to me that we're focusing too much on that. Let's take that out of the equation. Let's do our framework and that sort of thing and get on with the work and not worry about so much, this is our process.
It is absolutely. I think what's key here is engagement with our partners, so they know what we're doing, they know what we're planning, and then what we do provide is help as well.
Why don't we just tell them, hey, we put this together and it's here now, you can read about it.
Yeah, so we could do that. I guess the risk is that we don't produce something that's helpful to them as well, because again, this isn't necessarily about us providing something that is, I guess that helps out. This is about enabling our partners to also plan their work so they know what we can and can't provide for, and it helps us all in the end, because it helps nobody. Pardon me?
Me? It's a one-sided one now. Yeah.
But look, I mean, ultimately, you make a good point though, because we as an organisation, we do have what we have available. We have resources across our different teams, and ultimately, it is up to us to decide and demonstrate how we prioritise that resource to the right.
Look, and I can see this feeding into spatial planning and that sort of thing. Definitely, I just wonder, that amount of input we get from externals, and whether we actually require that to continue a process like this. Keith.
Just following on from Warren's comments, I feel the same way. It's making it far too complicated, and you should get runs on the ground. So when I read this report, I made some notes and I said, look, divide the region into 6 or 5, and then find out what resources are there and use them and not look for work, because I felt the same as Warren. I thought we were just loading ourselves up with more and more responsibility when the resources are there. So when I went through, I thought, okay, Waikato, where they fit in there, where do the maraes fit in there, where are our materials depots, what are the resource groups, who are the first responders, and obviously we've got fire brigades and the local contractors and the local TAs have got work things, and you've got all the roading companies. In our area, I could find 50 excavators within half an hour of ringing around. So I think I'd feel a lot more happy if you did that and say, look, this is the resource here. Let's find the holes in a particular area. If they need oversight, we can provide that, but we don't need to be there for everything. And I get worried when we're finding our staff are having to do their first responders for a lot of things when there's local people could be there. The other part that was missing, I felt, was this no mention of earthquakes. And the other part I think we should have within our resources is we should have 1 or 2 Bailey bridges here, because inevitably anything happens in our area, it's a bridge that goes, and that causes grief.
That's why we've got an army. That's why we've got an army. Ben.
Yeah, I agree with what Warren's saying. I'm worried about the expenditure going on here, because when we did Karakia Coast, when they actually did the costings for it, it was $64 million if you wanted to fix everything that they identified. There's a risk here that we're finding problems all over the place. And I agree. I think we should just deliver this. And then there are other issues like Otrahonga where you suddenly get a downpour. There's a new area that you need to look at. The other question I had is legislation pending. Do we know where that's sitting, and have they identified regional council as the payer of it? Because that was always sitting in the background.
So there's a couple of things there. I'll pass to Lisa to talk about the legislation that's coming in. I'll just, I guess, reinforce again that this is not a process of us looking to develop a whole of region work program, everything that we need to get involved in. This is more about us taking a region-wide view in terms of the risks that we have in our communities and the ones that come to the top, and therefore the ones that we need to prioritise with the resources we have available. So it's, as I said, at the moment, we have to be quite reactive. Say, for example, TCDC or Hauraki, they're undertaking adaptation projects at the moment. That's where we go. But what we need to do is make sure that that is actually the correct priority for investing our limited resources.
So that means you might say to TCDC, we're not going here because we have to go to Port Waikato instead.
But potentially, and that really gets into the engagement side of things as well, because other councils will be thinking about their work programs into the future. They'll be considering adaptation projects. They need to be aware that if they're starting to plan these projects, that they need to work with us and understand how we are going to be prioritising our resources as a regional council. And I'll pass to Lisa.
Yeah.
She's more across the legislation than I am.
Yeah, I was just going to touch in terms of, I mean, we have clear obligations under the Resource Management Act around, managing regional, hazards. And I mean, there are planners and people far more familiar with that. And we are the organisation that holds that regional information. And so we have that legislative obligation, and we're the people with the expertise to understand that risk. We're not saying that we are actually the people that then provide the solutions. So it's about actually, one of those key steps is it might inform our work programs, that's where that prioritisation comes in, but it will also inform other programs the work programs of other agencies, so not us. So that's.
Unless the legislation tells them that it's us that pays.
Yeah, and I mean, and that is, yeah, well, I mean, we won't know for sure until the final resource management legislation lands in terms of, the line. And then the other big uncertainty is the adaptation legislation that is expected this year, but whether or not it will actually come prior to the election, we don't know. But that is also the question. But the signal is that TAs will be responsible for leading adaptation projects that in the legislation, in the planned legislation that was signalled in the cabinet paper around the adaptation framework. But, our infrastructure is smack bang in the middle of the solution. So we have to be involved.
Robbie.
Sort of with Ben and Warren a bit, but there must be so much data that we can collect without actually, and we can quantify it. Like, say if you went to soils that are likely to subslide. So we must have soil maps in the region of where those are already. There must be, I know, like all the Karakia Plains and all our area is all, it's got all our soil types on it. So if you go to that and you go anything with a slope on that, there's risk of, some of the stuff is quite easy to quantify. It's when you need to go and someone wants to build something there and go, well, it is a risk to build there. You need to be able to do this. This is what needs to be assessed if that's actually able to be built on it, because it could, whatever. So I think it's more about just collecting really good data that's out there. And then am I thinking in the right direction?
Yeah.
It's actually not us actually doing a lot of physical work right now. Well, it is with adaptation plans, of course, but it's actually, there's mostly who collects, who's the outfit that's got all the soil data in New Zealand. Like, it's getting that and going, that with that sort of slope, this sort of rainfall, there's going to be slips there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely on the money there. It is about bringing together all of that information, that wealth of information that we hold, other agencies hold, and then essentially understanding based on that the risk profile.
What the profile is, yeah. So that's what we need. The speed of what we do it in, I suppose, is it, and the resourcing. That's right. But yeah, yeah.
But through you, Chair, I think you've actually highlighted that one of our key roles is an information provider. So we are the subject matter expert that's around that table, helping to inform communities about what their risk looks like, so that then other organisations can start to take action around adaptation.
Any other questions or final comments?
No, I just wanted to, there was one final slide,
right.
which I will rapidly run through, or two final slides, rapidly run through, because I know you're probably keen to finish up. So this is just essentially showing some of the flood modelling, and so regional exposure modelling is then a key part of the quantitative analysis of where that risk is across the region. So that will tell us who or what is exposed, whether it's the numbers of people, numbers of building, kilometres of road to what, so the hazard, and then when this might occur. So is it a current day risk? Is it a future climate risk? So that's a key input to this piece of work. And the flood modelling that we're doing and the team is a really key tool to help inform this. Next slide, thanks. So, sharing the draft approach with you was really an opportunity to get your early feedback on our working draft. I've made some notes already, but I guess we had some questions there as a prompt. But is there any further questions, or otherwise we're happy to take written feedback back at a later point?
No.
Just one question, and it comes through the theme of the day really, is that if we're seeing events every 8 days, is that not now business as usual? Leave you to reflect on that.
Oh, look, and it's a very real challenge of us, because quite often the people that we involve in these processes also get involved in emergency response. That does become a bit of a prioritization exercise for us as a council in terms of the effort that we put into both dealing with the future and dealing with the present.
Well, Greg, I think it's critical that we are clear and concise with our TAs when they approach us on wanting to do this adaptation work and that sort of thing. We've seen the costs that's involved. You highlighted one there with Karakia so far, and they're only in stage 2. Stage 2 to stage 3, so they've got a fair old way to go. So there's a huge amount of resource that goes into this space. So having a prioritisation process that we can actually look at things and go, well, where do you sit on the, are you high risk, are you medium risk, are you low risk, and that sort of thing is great to have. I think you've got a bit of feedback here, and by all means, councillors, email Lisa with any further feedback. But as I say, I would like to takeaway to be that, don't get hung up on just over consulting with externals. This is our process. This is our information. Once we've got it all together and we've got a framework, by all means, let them know and that sort of thing. And if they want to feed some stuff into it, that's great. But I just wouldn't get hung up on too much external consultation.
Primarily input will be internal, so from internal staff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, closing comments from anyone? Good night. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Yep. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Greg. No final comments?
No final comments. No, thank you. It was a good conversation. It's good to give us some steer about where we head with this. But you are dead on. It is primarily for our internal work. Help us prioritise the resource that we have.
Excellent. Geordie, you're up for the Karakia.
I can do one if you want, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, actually. Yeah.
Kia ora. Una hia mai te uru tapanui, ki wātia, ki mama, te nākau, te tēnana, te hinenaro, i te arataka koe rā e rongo, e whakaare e ake ki ronga, ki a teina, haume, huie, tae ki e.
Thank you very much, those staff that have remained in the chamber with us, and councillors for your patience and your input in getting through everything we had in front of us today. Very valuable sessions. And